Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Are you a nonprofit professional who's feeling overwhelmed and burnt out? Well, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am your host, Haley Cooper. On this podcast, we will share stories of leadership, courage, and empathy that'll help you learn to take care of yourself, your staff, organization, and community. You will hear from nonprofit leaders who have been in your shoes and have learned best practices to raise more revenue and make a greater impact. Let's thrive together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. This is your host, Haley Cooper, and I am very honored today to have Steve Smith, who is the president and founder of Growth Source Coaching, which is headquartered in my hometown, Lake Forest, California. He is an accomplished leader, management, and organizational enhancement coach who brings over 40 years of business building experience to every client relationship. We also share an interest in the executive coaches of Orange County, where I have a personal coach who has been on my podcast, Monica Horner, which serves nonprofit leaders in Orange County. So thank you, Steve, for being here and sharing your time with me.
Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this.
I'd love to know a little bit more about your background and what led you to start Growth Source Coaching and what you specifically offer for your clients.
Well, I enjoyed a very good 30-year career in consumer products manufacturing. I worked for 4 very large corporations, moved around a lot, but went up the ladder. And in those days, if you wanted to get promoted, you usually had to go someplace to do it. And we were happy to do so. That's how we got out to California here. In 2008, the whole thing came to an end. The last company I was with wasn't exactly the best match for me. And so I decided I needed to find something that I liked, something that I could really use my talents and feel like I was giving my best effort and not necessarily just chasing numbers and things from people many levels above. So I went out and I did a lot of networking and I met a lot of people. When you go from a very structured corporate environment out to small business networking, it's like jumping into a fire. There's no rules. You have to figure it out for yourself. And I ran into a consultant whose job it was to look at people who had executive level careers in larger industries and help them figure out what kind of a small business would be a good match for them. So I worked with her for a couple of months and she put me through some drills and taught me how to look at franchise operations and things like that. She was the one that came back to me and said, based on everything you've done and what you know in business, she goes, you need to seriously consider coaching. I'd heard of coaching. I knew people that had coaches, but I'd always looked at it as the kind of service reserved for the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and entertainers and politicians and public speakers and folks fairly high up the chain. And once I started diving into it, I realized it had made its way into the small business community. And there were people everywhere that were doing all kinds of different coaching. So I bought into a franchise, and 2.5 years into it, the franchise, they weren't big enough. They were a startup and they went bust. And so I had to take everything I purchased from them and privatize it to create what I had now. And the thing I like about that was even though they were a great start, there was a lot of things they did that I didn't necessarily warm up to. So I took the parts that I learned from them that I thought were really worthy. And then I took my own experience in leadership development and management and bolted it in. And that's where I came up with the company I have today. So I only focus on 3 disciplines: leadership for executives, business operations and marketing for small business owners, for professional service people that are just doing their own thing. Most of the time, what they really fall apart on is marketing. They're very good at their craft, but they're not really good at acquiring clients. And so I help those folks figure out how to do a grassroots marketing campaign that's not going to cost you a lot of money, but will bring the clients you want to work with to your door. So that's what growth source coaching is all about.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. And it sounds like you've had quite the journey from 2008 to now to taking the learned practices that you have, well, even beyond that, obviously, the leadership practices to then being able to help other people. And I would love to know your thoughts on coaching. I know that there's specific terminology that you can use to help people. So when you think of coaching, what do you define as a leadership coach?
Well, let's just start with coaching in general, because I frequently, even today, run into people who get coaching and consulting confused. They'll use those terms interchangeably when they are completely different disciplines. The best way I can describe it is if you were to sign up for a gym membership and decide to hire a personal trainer to help you reach your physical goals. That trainer is going to show you the best practices. They're going to help you figure out a plan for yourself, and then they're going to keep you motivated and focused so you get your best workout every time you show up at that gym. That's a coach. Coaches do 20% of the work. The client does 80% of the work because the client is the one benefiting from the effort. It would be like going in and hiring a trainer and then having the trainer not only show you the best exercises, but actually get on the machine and do them for you. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't be getting any benefit out of that. In a business, if you hire a consultant, they come in to do work that you either aren't capable of, don't have the expertise in, or don't have the time in. You're still involved. You still have to talk to them about what you need, but they do all the work. Coaching is the flip side of that. Coaching helps guide you and help you get out of your box that has kept you at whatever level of performance that you're at, and helps you broaden that and start getting out and doing things that maybe you wouldn't have done on your own. And so that's what coaches do. Coaches help people do more, get more, and feel good about it along the way.
Well, I love that analogy. That totally makes sense. And I think that's such a good distinction between coaching and consulting. And before we hit record, we were talking about someone that you referred me through YouTube videos called Jim Rohn. And we were talking about some of the mindset challenges that people have to wanting to be investing in themselves or investing in a coach. Sometimes there's like a mindset shift or a stigma around investing in yourself. And so I would love to know more about your perspective on what are some of those mindset challenges that leaders face and how you help them navigate them.
One of the biggest challenges for people in leadership roles is the idea that it's not all about them. They might be at the top of the pyramid, making the big decisions, having the authority and the responsibility for what the organization does, but they're not doing the work anymore. They're not at the bottom of the stack, close to the ground, interfacing with the customer. They're in more of a strategic position, guiding the company, making sure that it's going in the right direction and navigating obstacles before you get to them. And many leaders get up to those levels and they never really give up on that personal feeling of, I've got to do it all. And so what ends up happening is they don't maximize the efforts of the people they hire because they're still doing the stuff they used to do when they were at that level. They don't manage people appropriately. They do what I call mommy management, which is micromanaging. And it makes people crazy. You're not getting the most out of people when you're on them every 30 minutes about what they're doing. And so they ascend to these top flight positions, but attitudinally, mindset-wise, they haven't graduated. They're still thinking like they were when they were at the ground level. And there are some industries where that is very pronounced. Heavy technical industries like engineering, accounting, any kind of health diagnostic, anything that has a science component to it where you've had to go to school and you've had to get licensed and you've had to learn certain really mathematical disciplines. Once those people are ingrained in that, it's very hard for them to let that go. So one of the biggest things for me is helping them recognize the benefits of letting go and spending their time doing things that are truly worthy of where they are in the organization. Instead of spending all your time doing spreadsheets and pouring through stuff that you could have somebody at that level do for you, think about where you're taking the company. Because when you're in the weeds, you're not looking down the road. And all of a sudden you hit a wall and you think, gee, where'd that wall come from? Well, the wall was visible a mile away. You just weren't looking for it. So training people to think differently about the role they have and the responsibility they have to the entire organization, not just themselves, is the biggest hurdle in most cases for people that need leadership coaching.
Yeah, and I can totally see that. Like we were talking about, a lot of listeners here are nonprofit leaders, and they have either been the founders or they are in a organization where they wear all of the hats. And
yes,
now they've hit a pivotal moment where they have the budget to be able to hire people, or they're a founder and they realize that they want to step away to start that second tier of life, but still be involved with the organization because it is their baby. They built it from the ground up. But that idea of delegation is really hard because you hold tight to the vision.
yes.
And so it can be hard to delegate and want to let go. What are some of the mindset shifts that you help people have when it comes to the idea of letting go and letting other people into the organization to carry out that vision?
All right. So using your example of someone who was the founder of a nonprofit and they started it in their basement. And as it took on and more people got involved and funding increased, and all of a sudden it became a bona fide organization with its own office and locations and things like that. It's hard for the founder to be able to let go. It's like your baby is grown up. And what I try to let people know is the greatest thing you can do as a founder / current day executive director or CEO or something like that is treat that organization like a separate entity. That organization is a living, breathing entity with its own personality and all the other stuff by itself, separate from you. Because there is a day when you will tap out. You'll say, I've had enough. I want to distance myself. Maybe you move into an emeritus kind of status and other people move up and take your role. You want to leave them with an organization that's still viable. You don't want to have an organization the minute you walk out the door, the walls fall down.
Mm-hmm.
But that's figuratively what can happen when leaders don't recognize that at some point holding on is a detriment.
Yeah, that's good. And I had someone on the podcast who will come out in a few episodes. Emily, we talked about if the organization is too reliant on this and how to separate that identity. And I think especially in nonprofit work, we're so passionate about the work that it becomes who we are. And I've had to do the work where I've had to really separate myself from my mission and bringing it home because it is what I'm all about. And I think when it becomes who you are, your identity, then the organization can become too reliant on you. And so my question for you is like, how do you begin to separate your identity, like you said, creating it as its own entity when it's something that you live, breathe every day?
Well, I think for most people that really have that kind of emotional attachment to the company they've built, they probably equally have an attachment to the idea that when I'm gone, I want it to survive beyond me. I want it to be that legacy that lives on. And at some point later in life, I want people to be able to walk into the entryway and see my picture on the wall as the founder. Now I'm gone, right? But my presence is still there. It's still being felt because the organization now has lived on beyond me. And when people start to recognize that's really what the important element is, we're not going to be here forever. Then you start talking to them about, okay, what is it going to take in order for you to walk away and feel comfortable that the organization still embodies the principles that you started with and the culture and the ethics and the things that from the outside is what people look at and recognize your company is what it is. And so it goes from, oh my gosh, I got to hold on to all this stuff. Now you're looking at, what's my team look like? If I'm going to step back, I have to have people that I have trained and developed along the way who can step into my place. Sure, they're going to do things differently. Every generation comes in and does, because there's different tools and different things available to run organizations. But how you think and how you conduct yourself, the reputation that you have, the way people honor each other when they're in their daily work habits, those are the kind of things you can put in place if you have the right team coming up behind you. And of course, private enterprise calls a succession plan. Who's going to run it after I'm gone? Nonprofits have to do the same thing. They really have to. If I'm going to be gone in 2 years, I have to start now developing the talent that's going to step in when I leave. That's the only way I know to do it. And the farther out you're thinking about it, the better result you're going to have. If you're trying to do this with 6 months left, you're probably going to make some decisions that aren't going to last. They're not going to be the right ones because you're going to be under the gun. But if you're bringing the right people up through the organization and you're mentoring them in a way that lets them know, hey, they're going to be their own person, but there's some ideals that this organization was founded on that we need to ensure stay here. That's the best way to make that transition.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially when you talk about developing a team within an organization or a company with the mindset that this organization, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the community. And that's something that someone early on in my podcast, Victoria Torres, said that it belongs to the community and we have to be able to develop a team. But I think a lot of times, especially in nonprofits, we have this scarcity mindset in leadership that I've seen, and maybe it's not the resources to develop a team or we don't have the resources to invest. And so that is why there's a lot of high turnover in the nonprofit sector, is because people want that professional development. They want to be developed like you would be in a for-profit company. So what are some strategies that you help leaders implement to be able to start investing in their team and their culture?
Well, I think the first thing any real sincere leader has to recognize is the only way to keep an organization operating at a peak performance level with the reputation intact, delivering on the promise to whatever segment of the community they're there to support. You have the best people in the best spots. It's that about, having the right people on the right seats on the bus. It doesn't mean you have to go out and spend the most amount of money to find the highest priced people. It just means you have to find people who have a desire to want to improve and meet the criteria that the organization set up for. And as a leader, the way you can help them is by constantly looking for resources that will help develop your people. And the reason I throw that out there is because one of the other organizations I oversee is Executive Coaches of Orange County. And there's 50 coaches in this organization, and we all provide our time free of charge. Nobody gets paid for this. But our only mission is to work with nonprofit leaders to help them scale up what they do and how they do it so they can have the confidence to really make an impact in their organizations. Best part about it is we don't charge. The organization was set up under an endowment, so it gets paid for itself, and everybody's volunteered their time. So there's no charge as a leader in a nonprofit doing something else. Your job should be looking throughout the market all the time to find as many quality, free, or low-cost development services as you can get your hands on to give your people so that they're always in that mode where they're thinking about, how can I be better?
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs, helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Yeah, I think that's so important. And we'll link to the ECFOC in the show notes. I'm a client of it, so I know the benefit of it, and it's really helped me tremendously in my career. And you talked about, I would love to dive into this idea of investing in yourself so that you can be a better leader and the importance of it. And you shared a great analogy about the oxygen mask coming down before we hit record. And I would love to know your insights into why a leader needs to take that time to and shift that mindset that they are worthy of being invested in to be able to then create a better environment for themselves and for their team.
Well, look, being a leader means that you have the confidence and the determination to set the path, to go forward, to blaze the trail that other people will follow and help you on the journey. Some people will show up in leadership roles and they're just full of bravado, and they might pull it off for a while, but eventually everybody figures out that they're an empty suit. They don't really have the quality or the specialty or the experience behind them, and so they flame out. Then you have other people that are really solid players, but they don't spend enough time along the way continuing to develop themselves. And at some point they fall behind because they become irrelevant. As time moves on, things change. If you're really going to be a relevant leader that people constantly look at and say, I will follow him or her, it's because they see that you have enough of what they view as important to make sure the organization still moves forward, still viable, still earns the respect from the community, the revenue from the services they provide, so that those individuals at lower levels, nobody wants to go to work for an organization and the leadership is so questionable, you're not sure if you're going to get paid. That's the worst situation. But like I told you earlier, and I didn't come up with this example, I've heard this before, but if you've ever been on a plane and you're sitting in your seat before they take off, the flight attendants go through the rules. And one of the things they say is if we go through a period of pressurization in the cabin, the oxygen masks are going to fall down, one for every seat. Well, if you have a child next to you or an older person or somebody, you got to put your mask on first and get yourself all set before you attend to somebody else. Well, the reason in leadership is the same way. You have to attend to yourself first and make sure you're the best you can be so you can do justice to everybody who said, yes, I'll follow you.
Yeah, and I love that definition of leadership that you provided. And one of the questions that I like to ask people is, what is your definition of culture? Because I've had a few people on the podcast, they've really instilled this idea of culture because they know that is what carries on the organization. So my first question to you is, because everyone defines culture differently, how do you define culture within an organization?
To me, culture is simply, this is how we do what we do. It's the way we conduct ourselves. It's the way we collaborate. It's the way we make decisions. It's the way we decide how to move forward and make sure that the organization is vibrant and is doing what it's supposed to do. It's all that internal stuff. The interesting thing about cultures is you can't just say, gee, I don't know if I want culture in my company. You will end up generating over time a culture, whether you've designed it or not. And unfortunately, most companies don't think about trying to design it up front. They just let it run its course. And under those conditions, most of the time, the culture is fractured or it's dysfunctional, or there's other things that get in the way that might cause turnover to be higher than they want. It might cause performance to be lower than they want. And it's all because people have decided, gee, I don't see a culture that I can attach myself to, so I'm just going to bring my own bad behavior to work every day.
The framework that I use is EMC leadership. And when people bring their bad behavior to work, we identify it as a negative cycle of engagement. So they feel emotionally disconnected from each other and the people they're working with and their leaders and the culture. They don't see how they fit or that they're valued and how their role plays into the bigger vision. So it's natural that we're going to react that way because that's literally how our brain works if we feel disconnected. So it's like a toddler, right? Like they're not being bad to be bad. It's literally how they're wired.
Well, okay, so here's a good example. And I do this quite a bit with a lot of my private clients. I'll work with somebody that's got a fairly high position within a company. It's usually a corporate level thing. So they're not the owners. They're at the VP level or the C level or something like that. And after we get to know each other through the coaching process, then they'll start pulling the walls down and confiding, okay, this is what's really going on. And a lot of times people will lament that along the way, they've created relationships with people that work for them that are not healthy. And once we pick it apart and dive into it, what we realize is the person I'm coaching, the executive, is the one that created that problem. Just by how they show up, how they talk to people, how they communicate stuff, all manner of things that people do at those levels. Somehow they haven't done them well, or they haven't done them completely, or they haven't done them honestly. And over time, that creates what I call these little relationship fissures. people go off into their little silos and say, I don't want to deal with that person, so I'm going to just do my job and I don't want to be bothered. So when you get that kind of an environment, that is a culture. It's just not a good one. And so what I recommend to people that are in that situation, because the first question always is, once we figure out exactly what they have done to create that problem, now the question becomes, how do I fix it? How do I change it? Do you have a code of conduct? Not the company, you. Do you have a code that you subscribe to, that you perform to, and you don't deviate from every single day? And the pat answer is always no. So we'll work on a code of conduct. And a code of conduct is simply a short list, sometimes maybe 5 to 8 statements of behaviors that you will aspire to do every single day. Not stuff you won't do, stuff you will do, because it's all behavior driven. How you show up, how you interact, how you communicate, how you make decisions, how you give feedback, all that kind of stuff kind of shapes who you are as the leader. And so I'll say, let's put together a code of conduct that speaks to you, that you're willing to bind yourself to, so that every single day when you wake up and you read that and say, okay, this is what I've agreed that I'm going to show up and do. And if you stick to that over a fairly short period of time, you can start changing hearts and minds, because people will see that somebody's either gotten to you and told you can't do that anymore, or you've self-reflected and you've just say, you know what, that's really not the way I want to be. I want to be better than that. And so it starts with the individual really taking stock of what they're doing that might be positively or negatively influencing the rest of the team.
That's good. I've never heard of that before. I have my own idea of how I want to show up as a leader that I've created on my own, but not necessarily a code of conduct. Do you have an example that you could share with our listeners that people could refer to, a template or something that they could then design their own code of conduct as they're listening to this episode?
I have a lady now who she's in a VP level role, and she has constant infighting with her subordinates over how to do stuff. And so she's just adapted herself over time to immediately tell people what she wants done, and then immediately go into, and this is how I want you to do it. So she's not giving anybody any credit for their own experience or ingenuity or capability. She's just telling them all that kind of stuff. Of course, people are pushing back. And so one of the codes we wrote for her was what I call the what, when, how statement. And it goes like this. This is what I'd like you to do. That's the what. Here's when I'd like it to be done. It needs to be done by the end of the month. So you're giving them 2 statements, and then the first thing you're doing is asking a question. You're inviting that person in to say, this is how I would do it. Great. Let me know how it's going. And stop drilling them with all the stuff you think is going to work, when in fact, they might be more capable at getting it done than you. So when you start changing how you look at how you react to people, and you create statements to help guide you along the way, over time, you rewrite your own brain's expectations of how you're supposed to show up and do things. Now, if anybody wants to really dive into this themselves, just go on Google and just type in personal code of conduct or personal performance standards. And you will find a plethora of articles and templates. The only key I will tell you in all the stuff that you read is codes of conduct are behavior-based. It's what you do that everybody else sees or experiences. So at the end of the figuring out how you want to show up and how you want to be, if you're not writing statements that dictate how you operate, how you perform, how you behave, then you're not really doing it for yourself. You're doing it for something else. And you want to make sure you're doing it for yourself.
Hey there, podcast family. If you're like me and deeply committed to improving your leadership skills and fostering better connections with your team, I've got something truly amazing to share with you. I'm proud to introduce the EMC Masterclass, something I talk about often as a certified trainer. It's an incredible program developed by the renowned Dr. Lola Gershfield, an organizational psychologist and corporate emotional connection expert. You might remember her from a podcast episode where she shared invaluable insights into the world of emotional connection. Dr. Gershfeld's EMC Leaders courses are designed for anyone working with people, whether you're a manager, supervisor, team leader, educator, coach, mentor, or a team member. This program is truly for everyone looking to enhance their communication and collaboration skills to raise more revenue for their mission. Now, let me tell you why the EMC Masterclass is a game changer. Dr. Gershfeld's groundbreaking emotional connection process has been integrated into top universities' curriculum and recognized by international organizations like ICF, HRCI, and SHRM. Humans are wired to seek emotional safety, and when we feel safe, we're more likely to take risks, share innovative ideas, and collaborate effectively. The EMC process is the catalyst for creating that emotional safety within your team. The virtual EMC Masterclass consists of 8 modules with 4 hours of expertly recorded material, 13 quizzes to reinforce your learning, and a workbook filled with activities for offline practice and something I still refer to daily. Ready to become an emotional connection master? Dr. Gershfeld is offering an exclusive detail for our podcast listeners. Use the code LEADWITHHEART to enjoy a generous 10% discount on the EMC Masterclass. Head over to emcleaders.com and enroll in the EMC Masterclass today. Yeah, I think that's so important. And just the power of those simple questions invites people in to take ownership, to feel like they have a role. And then they're more empowered to be more productive because they get to be invited into that positive future and the solution that can be possible when you work together. Our behaviors are a result of our beliefs and our thoughts. And I know that you do a lot of cognitive and behavioral work with your clients. So when people are writing their code of conduct, yes, it is their behavior, but that starts with their belief about themselves or their belief about their work, and that influences their thoughts, then it influences their actions. So how do you go back to really developing that mindset and that thoughtful leadership to then be able to carry out those behaviors that they want to?
All right, that's a good question, because one of the things as a coach, and I'm going to go out on a limb and speak for just about every coach, one of the things we don't want to get caught in is doing therapy. Some people might be licensed for that. I'm not. So I try to avoid it. And the difference between coaching and therapy is coaching spends 80% of the time looking forward, with 20% of that time kind of referencing where you came from. Where therapy is the opposite. Therapy spends most of the time looking backwards to try to untangle what happened so that you have a better things going forward. So you have to be careful with doing that kind of stuff because you don't want to go too far back, because now you're getting into therapy mode.
I think it was around how our thoughts influence beliefs, which influence our actions. So how do you go back to not going into your deep childhood wounds? We all have thoughts. Specifically, I talk a lot about like our rejection mindset and how that influences the way we ask for money, because I'm a fundraiser and rejection comes up a lot. Our thoughts around fundraising influence our ability to take action or not to take action.
All right. So I do this thing that some people have told me feels like an out-of-body experience. And basically what I get them to do is talk through certain situations that have led to how they behave, how they show up based on past beliefs and things like that, by inviting in imaginary people into the session. So I'll ask them if they're telling me about something that I can tell very clearly is a behavior belief problem, which can be fixed as long as they can actually see the better alternative and are willing to make that switch. I'll say, tell me about a situation where you had somebody else involved, somebody else that was participating and witnessed this outcome. And so they'll tell me. And I'll say, what if that individual was on the call with us right now? And I ask them to tell me how that outcome made them feel, how that whole process that you went through treated them. What do you think that person would say? And it's amazing when you ask people this, because you can actually set it up and say, look, this person's here with us. They're not really with us, but they're here. And I'm asking them this. what would they say? You'd be amazed at how people can actually make that adjustment from their own head to their colleague's head and answer for them. But the whole idea in doing that is the minute you start talking about that audibly, your head picks up on what you're saying. And sometimes for the very first time, you become aware of what actually went down and how it might not have looked that good. So the whole idea is to get people to see themselves as everybody around them is seeing them. Because most everybody listening to this program has been in situations where at work, you've got somebody there that has an odd personality or a set of behaviors and just does kind of stuff that people shake their head about. The only person that hasn't figured it out is the person doing it. So the best way to help them get out from under that and change the belief that's driving that behavior is to have them see themselves as people around them are seeing. I'm telling you, you get into these conversations, and I've literally had people stop in mid-sentence, and then all of a sudden they come back and they say, oh, wow, I know what the problem is. And I'll say, what is it? And they'll say, I've been doing this and nobody likes that. And I understand now because if somebody did it to me, I wouldn't like it either. Bingo. You've basically opened the door to the issue. Now, the second part of that is what kind of behavior do you have to replace that with? Because if you want to just get rid of a behavior and just call it quits, that's very difficult. It's easier to migrate yourself over to a better behavior to replace the one that's not so good. And that's where the code of conduct comes in. Because now if you can draft a statement that says, I will always show up and treat people with respect, or something of that nature, because you traditionally show up and you don't acknowledge people, you don't talk to them, you do all this stuff that people hate. You have to be able to change that. And it takes a while to do it, but the individual has to actually see it and almost in that out-of-body experience, understand what everybody else sees and doesn't like. And once you can get them to that reality, now you have something to work with.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it definitely cultivates more empathy for each other and how our behaviors and our actions influence each other. And in the work that I do with EMC leaders, we use a reconnection form. So it guides you a reconnection process to help in difficult conversations, and it slows things down. So we all know that when we're in conflict, emotions are high and they are a higher processing system. So we have to slow things down and really understand what our triggers, what our raw spots are. And then we also what we need for a positive cycle of engagement. And then we flip it on the other side. So we do this and you talk through the other person's experience of whatever the conflict is. And you walk through this reconnection when you say, oh, well, what were their beliefs in this situation? And what did they need for a positive cycle of engagement? What were their fears about your relationship, about themselves? And it really helps develop that empathy towards that other person, that they're not the bad guy. They're a person having an experience in this conflict as well. And there are two people that are stuck in this negative cycle. So then you both understand what you need for this positive cycle of engagement and how can you utilize that to create bonding conversations where you can then continue to engage each other if that's possible. How can you repair the relationship and move forward and continue to utilize this framework to continue to be more productive and collaborative and be able to communicate?
Yes, and I will say there's another element of this that doesn't get talked a lot about, but to me it has just as much of a challenge in cultivating really quality relationships as questionable behavior. And it's the biases we all walk around with. And if you do any research on this, you will find there's 12 to 15 different recognized biases that people can have. And if they're in leader roles, it affects how you see people. It affects what you place value on. It affects how you make decisions. It affects how you acknowledge or how you admonish people. And those are very difficult sometimes to get people to recognize, because if they're walking around, they're the owner of the organization, and certain people show up to work and they conflict with the bias that this person has, that person's never going to get a fair shake. Not until the owner recognizes that the way they view that circumstance isn't correct anymore. And those kind of things change over time. Social norms affect that. But the bias that somebody has can absolutely wreck a productive culture and a really well-run organization because it causes people to question themselves for no good reason.
Yeah, that's a powerful way of looking at it. And I think it plays into being conscious of the unconscious and making sure that you are creating that culture of safety and trust within your organization so that people can show up as their full selves.
Yes.
Do you have any other advice for someone who is in a leadership role that maybe has just grown into this leadership role and they're like, how do I continue to move from that management role into leadership and lead their people?
Here's the one thing that probably about half the people I work with, I'll make this recommendation. It doesn't matter what level of an organization you're at. Everybody can benefit from having a mentor. That mentor could be in the organization themselves, or it could be somebody outside. And in fact, if you're at the executive director or the CEO level, sometimes you have to do what I call creating your own inner circle. So you might have anywhere from 3 to 5 people that you trust their judgment, their feedback, their observations about things, so that they'll give you the straight scoop. They won't sugarcoat things. They'll tell you as it is. These people might be within the organization. They might be in other organizations outside. But if you can develop that either single mentor or that inner circle of advisors, personal advisors, that's probably the strongest tool that a really good CEO who's always trying to stay on the edge of what's new and what's different and what's changing. But a lot of times, if left to our own devices, we don't see it. We're too busy protecting the walls of our own little box that we're not willing to peek out and say, gee, am I really going in the right direction? Is the stuff I'm doing still relevant? And are people still following it? So I always recommend get yourself some other people that you can talk with and get feedback on. And that is the best way to keep yourself course corrected.
Yes, I love that. I think investing in yourself, investing in that outside perspective is so important in helping you grow. Steve, if people want to follow you or learn more about the work that you do, where can they find you?
Well, if you have a connection on LinkedIn, just type in Steve Smith, Executive Coach. If you just put Steve Smith in, there's like pages of them, so you're not going to find me that way. But if you put in Steve Smith, Executive Coach, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I also have a podcast that my son and I do, and it's called Business Wingmen. We do an episode once a week, and we talk about professional endeavors and a lot of the stuff that you and I are talking about in terms of helping people figure out how to change course and either get rid of things that aren't productive or move off into areas where it can improve what they do. And so I would say if people are interested in listening to that kind of stuff, it's usually 30, 40 minutes long. Just hit up the Business Wingmen website or wherever you get podcast information, and we're on there. All you have to do is search for us and you'll find us. But yeah, those are the two best places. And then Growth Source Coaching is my private site. And so you can find a lot about me there.
Well, we will link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. I've really appreciated this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I thought we did some great work.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.